Hey guys, it's Cheryl from Woodshop Diaries, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to build some basic face frame base cabinets. I'm currently in the middle of redoing my laundry room, and I built these cabinets for that space. So here, I'm going to show you how to assemble them, but in a future video coming very soon, I'll be sharing how I installed them and what they look like in their finished base. So if you're not already subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on that video. But for now, let's get building. Before we make any sawdust, let's take just a moment to talk about some standard cabinet dimensions and make a few notes. While there are some standards to follow when building base cabinets, there are also a lot of ways that you can customize them depending on your space and how you plan to use them. In most kitchens, laundry rooms, or basically anywhere that you're standing and working on a countertop, the standard cabinet height is 34.5 inches tall. Usually the countertops that you're placing on these cabinets are about 1.5 inches thick, so that makes the total height from the floor to the countertop 36 inches. Typical cabinet depth is about 24 inches in most applications except bathrooms. In bathrooms, vanities are typically 21 inches deep. Of course, that's just a general rule of thumb and can be customized. Something to consider when discussing cabinet depth is whether you want to have inset or overlay doors. Inset doors are flush to the front of the face frame, but overlay doors lay over the front. Typically, if I'm building cabinets with overlay doors, I'll make my cabinet box about 1 inch shallower. That way, when I put the door on the front, the overall depth, including the door, is still about 24 inches. Cabinet width is the most variable dimension. This is typically what you customize the most to fit your space. It's common to see cabinet widths range anywhere from 6 up to 36 inches, sometimes even wider than that. Okay, so now that we've covered just a few basics, let's dive into actually building. I built my main cabinet boxes from 3/4 inch plywood. I prefer using birch or maple plywood for my cabinets, and here I'm using a combination of both. I ripped my plywood sheets into two 22-inch wide strips. Each strip will become one cabinet. I saved this small leftover plywood strip to use for top supports later. I trimmed each 22-inch plywood strip down into 2 side panels, and then I cut the bottom panel from what was left. The bottom should be cut about 1.5 inches shorter than the overall width that you want your cabinet box. Now, here's a somewhat controversial step: cutting the toe kick. Most cabinets have what's called a toe kick at the front corner. It's just basically a notched out section so that your toes don't kick the cabinet when you stand in front of them. There are multiple ways to handle the toe kick. You could make your cabinet boxes a little shorter and build a separate base made from 2x4s to set them on. Or you could notch out the front corners of the side panels. Either way works fine. I personally prefer just to notch out my corners, that way I don't have to go buy any 2x4s. So I marked my notches about 3.5 inches tall and 4.5 inches deep, and I cut these out with a jigsaw. From the plywood strips that I saved earlier, I cut 3 pieces for each cabinet to the same length as my bottom panel. So each cabinet gets 2 side panels, 1 bottom panel, and 3 strips. There are several ways to assemble the box once all the pieces are cut, but I like to assemble my cabinets with pocket holes. I drilled pocket holes into the ends of all 3 strips and into the ends of the bottom panel. Then I assembled using pocket hole screws. Since I'm adding face frames onto the front, I needed to consider where to install the bottom panel. I could install the bottom panel flush to the toe kick and let the face frame hang off the bottom side, or I could install the bottom panel up just a little and keep the face frame even with the toe kick. Either way would work, but I preferred the second option. So I marked and installed my bottom panel about 5 1/8 inch up just to give me a small lip on the front. Then I secured the plywood strips at the top, one at the front and two at the back. The two strips at the top are for securing the countertop, and the one across the back is for securing the cabinet to the wall studs during installation. Now at this point, the box is assembled and the next part is attaching the face frame. I made my face frames from pre-primed 1x4s that I ripped in half. So they were about 1 3/4 inches wide, just a little less after the blade kerf. If you don't have a table saw to rip a custom size, using pre-cut 1x2s works great for face frames. Thin and narrow boards like these tend to split pretty easy, so I like to use this Craig Micro pocket hole jig. A standard size jig will work if you're careful, but this one makes smaller holes and you use them with smaller panhead screws, so it's just less likely to split or crack. Also, I know that some of you will fuss at me for not using wood glue. Feel free to add it here if you want. You can attach your face frame multiple ways to the cabinet box. In this case, I drilled pocket holes along the front edges of the cabinet box and attached through those. And to be honest, I actually meant to drill these before I assembled the box and I just totally forgot. Since these cabinets are going into a nook and you're not going to see the sides, I'm not worried about seeing these holes. But if the side of your cabinet will be exposed, you could also use wood glue and nails or screws on the front and just putty over them. For my end cabinets, I cut the piece on the face frame that will go against the walls about 3/4 inch wider, so they'll overhang the sides. This is basically like a built-in filler strip. It adds some wiggle room to be able to open the door, provides room to butt up the baseboard after installation, and it compensates for potential unsquare inside drywall corners. It's time to add the stuff inside the cabinets. I don't want to bog down this video with a ton of details about installing drawers because I already have a complete video series for that. So I'll share an overview here and I'll link additional information in the video description below. Because I added face frames here, I needed to install some spacer blocks to mount my drawer slides onto. Since my face frame set inside my cabinet box about 1 inch, I stacked scrap 1/4 and 3/4 inch plywood at my drawer slide locations. Then I could mount my drawer slides onto these blocks. For my other cabinets, I was installing shelves, so I used a shelf pin jig to drill shelf pin holes into the sides of the cabinet. These holes will allow you to add adjustable shelves using pins, and I'll show that more later. To finish up the cabinet box, I cut and stapled a 1/4 inch plywood back panel over the back of each cabinet. Next, I built the doors and the drawer fronts so I could start the dreaded process of painting. I built my doors with 1.5-inch overlay on all sides. You can build a cabinet door 100 ways. I've shared several of those in my past videos. But for these doors, I cut my door frame pieces from 1x3s and used a router and some scrap blocks to cut the ends of my rails with a tongue. Then I brought my pieces to the table saw and cut a 1/4-inch groove out of the center so that the tongue and grooves fit snug. I cut 1/4-inch plywood panels to fit inside these frames and assembled 2 doors using wood glue. While these dried, I built my drawer fronts. They look similar, but I built them a little different. I assembled 2 drawer front frames using wood glue and dowels. Once these were dry, I routed out the back side to fit a 1/2-inch plywood panel inside. These will be screwed onto the front of the drawer boxes so you won't see the back side. So instead of wasting my time chiseling the rounded corners square, I just used a jigsaw to curve the plywood corners. Then I glued them into the frames. Since my top drawer front was only 6 inches tall and 1x3s are 2.5 inches thick, if I made my top drawer front the same way, the opening would only have been 1 inch. So instead, I cut this drawer front from 3/4 inch plywood and just made it a slab style instead of a shaker style front. Once all the doors and the drawer fronts were assembled and sanded well, it was time for paint. Now, I hate painting more than just about anything, so I don't really have great advice on the process except just take your time and turn on the radio to calm your nerves. I applied a coat of primer first, then caulked around the door panels and the drawer fronts. This just helps cover up any weird gaps for a seamless looking paint job. Once the caulk had dried, I applied the paint. Now, I like to use Sherwin-Williams Emerald Enamel on my furniture. It's just a personal preference. Also, just ignore this color because I ended up coming back and painting a totally different color after this. While the paint was curing, I assembled the drawer boxes, which were the final part that I hadn't built yet. I have a whole separate video on how to assemble drawer boxes, but basically I just assembled 2 plywood drawer boxes with pocket holes and screws, installing the bottom panel into dados before adding the last side. Then I installed these into the cabinet. Once the drawer was in, I added the drawer front using screws from the inside of the box. Now, since the drawer box is 3/4 inches thick and the drawer front is a 1/2 inch thick in the center, I knew a 1 1/4 inch long screw would likely be just a hair too long. So what I did is I added a washer under the screw to basically shorten it just a little to keep it from poking out the front side. Because these are going in my laundry room, for the top drawer, instead of making just an actual drawer, I assembled a drying rack using wood dowels. I'll cover this more in a later video, but for now, I installed that into the cabinet and attached the final drawer front. Now, all that's left is installing the doors. I used a concealed hinge jig to drill holes in the 2 doors to install concealed hinges. Since I built these for 1.5-inch overlay doors, I made sure to purchase 1.5-inch overlay hinges. After the hinges were installed on the doors, I held them in place and secured them to the face frames on each cabinet. And with that, these cabinets were ready to install in my laundry room. Oh wait, I forgot about the shelves. Remember I told you about adding adjustable shelves with shelf pins? Well, I placed these pins in the holes and added some 3/4-inch plywood shelves into the cabinets. And now these are ready to install. After they're in place, I will cut to fit and nail this piece across the toe kicks to finish up. So be sure to subscribe to the channel and stick around to see these again in their new home soon. For now, I'll link additional resources and information on cabinet building in the description below. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!